The movie begins with the introduction of our protagonist, Mason Pettitz. He narrates that while growing up, he struggled to find any sense of purpose or meaning in life. While in college, he enrolled in law school, but it soon got monotonous and he dropped out. After that, he joined the army, and it was the first time he found his purpose and felt truly alive. During this period, he married Jenny, and they had a daughter named Casey. One day, Mason and his team are ordered to go to a country called Paldonia to take down the dictator Juan Venegas. But their mission takes a turn when their helicopter is struck by a missile. Because of this, Mason lost not only his purpose in life, but also his comrades, and has to go back to regular life. With no other choice, he completes law school and starts working as a lawyer. In the present, Mason is on his way to Casey's school to drop her off, and the small girl tells him about a kid who keeps trying to kiss her. Mason instructs his daughter to punch the kid in the throat if he attempts to kiss her again and leaves for work. After dropping Casey, Mason's office is visited by an old friend named Sebastian Earle. They're happy to see each other after a long time, and Sebastian declares that he has something important to discuss, and Sebastian takes Mason to his office, where he reveals that he has started his own private security agency called CDI, and that he wants Mason to join him. He explains that a female American reporter is going to Paldonia to interview President Venegas, and Mason needs to accompany her for the protection. Hearing this, Mason immediately refuses the offer because Venegas is responsible for the loss of his teammates and the end of his military career. After all that, he doesn't understand why Sebastian would work for such a guy, but Sebastian offers him $20,000 and clear that he knows how miserable Mason is in his lawyer job, and Sebastian continues to insist, and in the end, Mason reluctantly agrees to take the job. When Mason returned home, he discovered that Jenny was summoned by the principal at Casey's school because his daughter smacked the boy in the throat who tried to kiss her. As a result, Mason and Jenny have an argument, further damaging their already troubled marriage. Jenny is concerned when she learns about the job Sebastian has offered him, but she eventually lets him go, thinking it might help him move on from his issues and fix their failing marriage. The next day, Mason meets journalist Claire Wellington, and after introducing himself, they head directly to the airport and fly to Paldonia. On the way, Mason watches some troll videos of Claire, and she notices this. She asks if he's making fun of her, but he assures her that's not the case. She then says that she intends to fix her reputation and reveals that Venegas hasn't given any media interviews in the last 10 years. However, he has now personally invited her for an interview, so it's a big deal for her. Soon they arrive in Paldonia, where they are greeted by President Venegas. He tells Claire that she's even more beautiful in person and kisses her hand. While Mason is extensively searched by Venegas security, they then get into a car and head for the capital. Claire introduces Mason to Venegas, who says that he's already done his research and knows that Mason is a former army officer. After this, Claire and Venegas continue chatting and having drinks, completely ignoring Mason. On their route in the middle of a bridge, the security car in front of them explodes, and they are ambushed by rebels who are there to assassinate Venegas. So Mason takes control of the car and sends Venegas and Claire to the back seat. He retaliates by shooting at the attackers, and he ends up crashing their car. After taking out everyone, Mason limps out of the car, and Venegas and Claire are shocked by his combat skills. Venegas continues to praise him, but Mason is irritated and says that he and Claire are leaving right now. Claire says that she needs to conduct the interview first because this is a huge opportunity for her, but Mason says that her life is more important than her career and suggests they leave. After walking away, they go into the bush and stop for Claire to rest, and Venegas comes shortly after having followed them, and Mason contacts Sebastian to let him know what happened. When he reveals that he killed all those attackers alone, Sebastian is shocked. Mason explains that they're stranded in the forest and need a way out, so Sebastian assures him that he has their location and they will send a helicopter with his men to pick them up soon. Venegas asks for the phone, but Mason declines. Venegas then threatens Mason with arrest for being a foreign spy, but Mason pulls out a gun and threatens Venegas with it. Claire steps in and persuades Mason to assist Venegas, and he calls his nephew George, who is surprised to learn that Venegas is still alive. Venegas is aware that he is the mastermind behind the attack and assures him that he is still well. Claire is surprised to find that Venegas' own nephew is working with the rebels. However, he says that George is just a puppet following someone else's orders. Venegas urges them to help him protect his people, but Mason takes Claire with him and walks away, leaving Venegas behind. Claire tries to get Mason to assist Venegas so that she can conduct the interview, but Mason is determined about not assisting Venegas. Claire is perplexed as to why Mason appears to be angry with Venegas. Shortly after, they see a helicopter coming and feel relieved, thinking they can finally go home, but Mason watches the chopper flying away after dropping off 2 shooters. He realizes that they aren't coming to help them. The gunmen pursue them while the chopper fires on them as they flee. They come to a halt in the clearing near a fallen tree, and Mason positions a sniper and waits for the helicopter. Claire, on the other hand, stands back and records everything that happens. Mason successfully snipes the pilot, and they flee into the woods just as the chopper crashes. Claire just keeps running until she realizes she has lost Mason. She shouts out for Mason, but she is confronted by the two gunmen. Claire hides behind a tree and clutches a tree branch, silently waiting for one of the rebels to approach the tree. Suddenly, Mason appears and engages in combat with the rebel, and Mason manages to take down the attacker. Claire emerges from her hiding place as Mason stands facing Claire, but a rebel smacks him on the head. But surprisingly, Venegas shows up and he shoots the attacker. After a while, George and his men show up, and he's upset to see the helicopter's condition. Just then, the leader of the mercenaries, Colonel Jan, arrives and scolds George for not being able to kill his uncle. George explains that his mercenaries also failed in their task, but Colonel Jan gets angry and threatens to kill him if he messes up again. Returning to Mason's group, the trio has halted by the river to relax for a while. Claire approached Mason to start up a discussion and learned about why Mason hates Venegas. Mason tells Claire about the helicopter crash in the same area and how he lost his comrades. After a little rest, Venegas takes Mason and Claire to his hometown, where the locals admire him. After some time, Claire sits down with Venegas for an interview while Mason records their conversation. Claire mentions the attack earlier and asks why these mercenaries are after him. Venegas explains that Paldonia has a lot of the rare mineral lanthanide, which is necessary for creating phones, laptops, and other modern tech. Large Western companies want to mine it in Paldonia, but this harms the soil and local environment. If foreign businesses extract and sell the minerals, it will cause big financial losses, so Venegas is preventing all foreign corporations from establishing themselves in Paldonia, making him an enemy of powerful people. Because of this, he is facing attacks from mercenaries and militants paid by external forces. Mason, who has been filming the interview, gradually realizes that Venegas isn't such a nasty guy. That night, Claire, Mason, and Venegas enjoy a good time partying with the locals. Later, Claire approaches Mason and tries to get his approval. However, he politely refuses and tells her that he loves his wife and can't do this to her. The next morning, Mason wakes up Claire and tells her she needs to get dressed since they are leaving. When Venegas enters the room, he encourages Mason to stay and see the truth before indicating that he knows why Mason was sent to be Claire's protection. Mason calls Sebastian and questions why he chose him for the mission. He doesn't understand why the mercenaries from the helicopter were after them. So Sebastian confesses that he's received orders from highly influential people to get rid of Venegas, and he assumes that Mason would also want revenge from Venegas for killing their teammates. Those mercenaries were not supposed to attack them, but they were only after Venegas. Mason hangs up without saying anything else. Mason calls his home, and he conveys his gratitude and affection to Jenny. Jenny is relieved to hear his voice. She apologizes for what happened earlier and asks him to return home safely. Mason takes out his gun and approaches Venegas. Instead of shooting Venegas, he walks past them, taking his belongings, and suggests they should leave immediately. However, before they can escape, Colonel Jan and his troops arrive, and the group flees. But Venegas notices the rebels are attacking the villagers. He comes out of hiding. Meanwhile, Claire persuades Mason to assist Venegas because the colonel will undoubtedly kill the villagers and Venegas. So Mason grabs Venegas with his horse, and they ride away. Claire also climbs on a horse and begins rushing, but soon she falls and gets captured by the colonel. Seeing this, Mason is worried, but Venegas assures him that they won't harm her as long as he's alive. Later, Mason and Venegas reach a town and decide to spend the night there. Venegas shares with Mason that he wasn't the one who shot down the helicopter. During the American invasion, he had lost hope and was planning to escape through underground tunnels, and that the Paldonia army couldn't track him and shoot down American choppers thinking it was Venegas, so he believes that it was friendly fire. The two spend the night in a church. Mason then informs him that he was sent here to kill him, but Venegas says he already knows that. Later, they meet with Venegas's trusted acquaintance Bobby and asking for his assistance. The next day, Mason meets with Colonel Jan, while Venegas remains hidden. Mason and Colonel Jan stand in the middle of a seemingly calm village, guns aimed at each other. One of Colonel Jan's rebels forces Claire to her knees and points a gun at her head. Colonel Jan threatens Mason with death if he does not give him Venegas. Venegas appears with a smug look on his face, followed by thousands of locals to protect him, because the private army has only been contracted to attack Venegas. They cannot open fire on innocent citizens, as this will put them in serious trouble. During the chaos, the three easily escape using an underground tunnel, and through a secret entrance they sneak into Venegas's office in the palace. They find George sitting alone, who is scared to see his uncle. Claire begins live streaming from her phone, and Venegas tells his nephew rebels would simply dispose of him once they obtain what they want. but together they can protect the nation. Hearing this, George realizes his mistake, so he tearfully hugs and apologizes to his uncle. Moments later, one of the generals enters and he immediately shoots Venegas. George gets angry and shoots the general, who fires back repeatedly. Mason grabs Claire to keep her safe. Mason helps Venegas up and he pulls the bullet from his suit, telling Mason that he is wearing a bulletproof vest. But their joy is short-lived because George has been shot. Venegas is devastated as his nephew dies in his arms. Soon encircled by many soldiers, they are all pointing guns at him, but he assures them that he is their president, not their enemy. He tells them this is their nation, and they are not terrorists, but soldiers fighting to protect it. Suddenly, Colonel Jan arrives with his men, but the soldiers turn towards him and start attacking the mercenaries to protect their president. The trio shelter behind a desk with Claire still filming everything, and a war breaks out inside the palace, and Mason makes sure to defend Claire and even Venegas. Colonel Jan and one of his men chase the trio, while the Paldonia soldiers and the rest of the rebels are fighting. Mason orders Venegas and Claire to go first while he stays behind to battle with Colonel Jan. Colonel Jan pins Mason to the ground and starts beating him. He says that he was the one who shot down his helicopter and killed his teammates. Jan struggles as he pushes the knife down to kill Mason, but Claire arrives and knocks him unconscious. The pair then goes to Venegas and the Paldonia soldiers, who are being outnumbered by the rebels. Mason falls to the floor and grabs a gun before opening fire on the insurgents. Meanwhile, Claire and Venegas are staring at him in astonishment, with Claire continuing to record. Sebastian and his men drive through the gate and enter into the palace. They assist Mason and the Paldonia soldiers in defeating the retreating rebels. The war has ended, and Claire has revealed the entire truth about Venegas and Paldonia to the world. The palace has been repaired, and Venegas has been granted the opportunity to tell the world his story. Before the interview, Venegas thanks Claire and Mason for their assistance, especially Claire, who made it possible for the world to witness the truth. The interview begins, and it is broadcast worldwide. Mason returns to his home and reunites with his family. He apologizes to Jenny and says that he wants to fix their marriage. Soon after, Mason receives a text from Venegas, informing him that he has sent Mason a small gift. That small surprise turns out to be $5 million as a reward for helping him. With this, Mason finds a new purpose in life, which is to spend more time with his family. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you can get more videos like this.